Schönen guten Tag, meine
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I invited my colleagues to an urgent meeting of the G7 foreign ministers because we are facing the most urgent of all conceivable threats. However unimaginable it may appear, we are facing the very concrete threat of a military conflict in the heart of Europe. The world knows, and no Twitter bots, no false flag operation, no disinformation campaign is going to alter this. The world knows who bears the responsibility for this. For months, we've been observing a massive deployment of Russian troops along the border of Russia with Ukraine, something unseen since the end of the Cold War. And the statements by the separatists over the last 24 hours seem to be following exactly the script against which many had been warning. An orchestration, creating a scenario that provides a justification for a military intervention. We do not know whether an attack is a done deal. However, we believe that the threat to Ukraine is very real indeed. And it has already shown real consequences with regard to investments in the country, air traffic, jobs, and the lives of the people in Ukraine. Thus, we, the ministers of the G7, met today. We represent the strongest economic nations amongst the democracies of the world, and we've come together to express our solidarity with Ukraine. This is also why we invited my dear colleague, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, to this meeting today. And we told him that in the face of this serious security crisis, which has also turned into a serious and a grave economic and financial crisis for Ukraine, we, the members of the G7, are united and stand at Ukraine's side. Since 2014, we have made available more than $48 billion to Ukraine together with the international financial institutions. And we will continue to coordinate closely with the Ukrainian government in order to make sure that Ukraine receives the assistance without delay that it needs to preserve its economic and financial stability. Today we also were very clear in that it would be wrong for Russia to believe that it could increase its own security by repressing others. The opposite is the case. If Russia were to once again violate Ukraine's sovereignty, it would immediately witness massive consequences, economic consequences, financial and political consequences, but also strategic and also individual consequences for all those who bear personal responsibility for this crisis. However, we, the foreign ministers of the G7, also met today in order to underline that this doesn't have and must not happen. As politicians, but also as mothers and fathers, we bear the duty to avert the catastrophe on our horizon. This is why we continue to be ready to engage in negotiations. We want to talk to Russia about our common security. And we have been ready to do so for quite some time, bilaterally, but also in the framework of the NATO-Russia Council, within the OSCE, and also here in Munich. Ladies and gentlemen, today we met for an urgent meeting because the situation is very serious indeed. However, history has not yet been written. We still see an easy way out. And it is for the Russian government to decide to seek this way out. Our common message as the members of the G7 addressed to Russia is thus very clear. We appeal to them to not commit this fatal mistake. Withdraw your troops, prevent damage to Ukraine and Russia, and let us engage in talks. Thank you very much indeed. We have time for 4 questions, roughly. Mr. Dels first. Madam Minister, you just said that you were not quite sure yet that President Putin had already decided to invade Ukraine. The American president was a bit clearer in that regard last night. what gives you reason to believe that that decision has not yet been taken? Because you said yourself that in a way they were following the script we had all been afraid of. When do you think would you be sure that that decision has been taken? You know, I would be sure once we saw the facts. And in a crisis situation, this is a very unfortunate thing. If people are just, you know, assuming or believing, we have to be very careful not to become the victim of targeted disinformation. And that is why it is so important that we take a very close look at what is happening. We know that in the so-called People's Republics, disinformation campaigns are being waged. Russia has more than 140,000 troops amassed at the border with Ukraine. And now they pretend to be threatened by the separatists in Ukraine. To be quite clear, Ukraine has no reason whatsoever for the evacuation, has not given any cause for Russia to evacuate its troops. Ukraine has given no reason whatsoever for the evacuations that were ordered yesterday. We must not allow hot air being turned into reasons for war. It's thus also important that the OSCE observers on the ground continue to be able to be the ears and the eyes of the international community on the ground. They are more important than ever because they are the ones to give us clarity about what is happening on the ground. And this is why I urgently appeal to each and everyone that we take a close look, that we look at what is happening, identify the facts on the ground, and that on the other hand, we don't tend to be naive and to be deluded. Mr. Bröcker. Madam Minister, I have been told that a very close transatlantic cooperation has been diagnosed over the past few days. If the American president now says the war is imminent, there's no way to avoid it, you should have information to that regard too. Do you have the same information that the American president has? And the second question is, what are the concrete steps you intend to take, for example, with your Russian counterpart in order to do as the German Chancellor, Mr. Scholz, said, to keep the lane open for a dialogue? We're not in the next few days. We're talking minutes and hours here. And this is why we just had, or rather called this G7 meeting at very short notice and invited our Ukrainian colleague to attend. We are all attending this conference. We are engaging and exchanging views continuously, also with regard to a picture of the situation on the ground. Over the last few days, we've been engaging time and again, talking about the different scenarios. That different scenarios seem to be on the horizon, that there seem to be scripts for false flag operations, and a false flag operation can turn into another situation. Now the separatists in the occupied territories, you know, we don't really see 140,000 troops moving into the Ukraine right now, but we nevertheless have to be prepared. And as I said, we are staying in close contact on this. We are all living on this earth. We are all living here in the heart of Europe. These days, I think we have given a clear illustration of the fact how close we stand as the transatlantic community. Trying to find the hair in the soup, so to speak, would be the completely wrong point in time to do so. We have to show solidarity towards one another, keep a level head, a clear head, and a warm heart that beats for Ukraine. Associated Press, Mr. or Mrs. Ritter?
My question is regarding sanctions, the preparation of sanctions. At what point, what kind of actions from Russia would trigger the sanctions that you have been talking about? Would it be an invasion of government-controlled territory, or would it also apply to an invasion of the Donbass? Thank you.
A breach of the integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine would be a breach of the sovereignty of the Ukraine. So you cannot say that one geographical part is a bit more Ukrainian and another one is less part of Ukraine. And I think we've been very clear in that regard over the last few days. We've wrapped up a package of sanctions over the last few days and weeks. We've also made it clear that they're not just the scenario of troops being moved into the country that would trigger these sanctions. We are preparing ourselves for different scenarios right now. But, you know, the day before yesterday, in the German parliament, someone used an image that I think is very apt when you play chess. You know, if you were to present your next 5 steps in advance, you would not, at the end of the day, be very successful. So I cannot but repeat what we have made clear over the last few weeks. We are preparing for any kind of scenario and situation. At the same time, we're doing whatever we can to make sure that these scenarios don't become reality. That is what we keep doing these days, these minutes, these hours. The last question, Andreas Rinke. Madam Minister, if I may come back to the issue of the sanctions. I think it's been quite clear, all governments have made it clear that harsh sanctions will be taken. Nevertheless, there seems to be some doubt as regards sanctions that would be taken to a less important or a minor scenario. Have you reached agreement in the meantime on the sanctions or set of sanctions for a certain set of scenarios? And the stability that the Chancellor mentioned in his speech today, the American Vice President took a different view of that today. She clearly illustrated and named the sanctions that they intend to take. Could you do the same on behalf of the European Union and on behalf of Germany? You know, as I said, I've just come from a meeting with the High Representative of the European Union, and I said that we are about to publish a package of sanctions. I have been very clear regarding my own line. We stand united, and I cannot but repeat and underline once again that we are prepared for any eventuality, that there are different aspects, different trigger points, there are different measures or set of measures, as I said in the past. It's not always the harshest reaction that is the best weapon or cuts best. So we have to take a close look at the situation arising and assess it on that basis. As I said, the worst that could happen would be war in the heart of Europe. That would be the worst scenario, really, and we will do whatever we can to avert this. Thank you very much.